Dear Mr. X, my name is Danielle. Something has been happening to me since I was around 8 years old. It's hard to explain. The best way to put it is a weird state of mind where I'm trapped between being asleep and awake. It almost feels like a whole other dimension of existence. If you ever saw the movie Insidious, where the father and son enter the spiritual realm called the Further, it's a bit like that. It's a place where time and space seem to be warped and twisted, yet somehow open and expanded. Whenever this occurs, I get this tingling feeling all throughout my body. I can always see that I'm in the same room I laid down to sleep in, but steeped in an otherworldly darkness. The unmistakable sense of evil and dread permeates the entire space, a heaviness of being submerged in pure, negative energy. On top of that, I get the feeling that creatures hide within the blackness, just waiting there for me to join them. When I was younger, I just assumed they were nightmares because the experience was always followed by a frightening case of sleep paralysis. I was always prone to really bad night terrors, especially when staying at my grandmother's house. Everyone in the family knew there was something off about that place. My grandma said they would see me having full conversations facing the wall in the room I used to sleep in. As I grew older, I trained myself to feel the onset of these things, and although it was extremely difficult, I could usually shake myself out of it. The moment of truth, when I know in my heart that it is time to struggle and break free from my impending mental doom, is among the scariest feelings in the world to me. Thankfully, it wasn't happening quite as often around that time. The most recent time I had this happen was, oddly enough, at school. I was nodding my head, trying to stay awake as I sat in the student lounge. I couldn't resist the call of sleep, and I knew it had been a while since my last experience. So I decided to test myself, let myself go and just see what would happen. As soon as I made that decision, the lounge went completely dark, except for a spotlight that pointed at me from above. I felt a strange sense of density around me as I stood up and began walking around the room. I knew I was not alone. The small radius lit by the glaring spotlight was sharply cut off by the pitch blackness that just lay outside of its boundaries. In the faint glow beyond it, I could see twisted, demonic-looking creatures gathered in a circle, teasing and flirting with the seemingly protective cone of light around me. I could barely make out the silhouettes from the refracted light, dozens of crouching, emaciated figures, distorted, goat-like features on their faces, some with horns. At the first sight of a mutated, deformed, and unknown body part dipping into the light, reaching toward me, an ice-cold terror poured over my body like water, paralyzing me with fear. They wanted me. I could feel it. All I could do was try desperately to wake up, closing my eyes and trying to force my way out of the nightmare. I frantically shook my head back and forth, begging my mind for an escape. Usually when I'm in bed, my husband wakes me up when he sees me shaking my head, thus freeing me from my unconscious prison. But this time, I was alone, fending for myself. That's the last time I ever allow myself to fall asleep without someone looking out for me. I would really appreciate your feedback on this. Sincerely, Danielle.
I'm sure many of you have heard about things called shadow people. Growing up, my mother and her siblings always had scary stories to tell about how walking shadows shaped like children would sit outside of their attic room window trying to coax them into climbing out. As I got older, they eventually came to me, appearing in various shapes and sizes around my neighborhood. If you haven't heard these stories from me already, don't worry, I'll be featuring them in another video soon. Anyway, I always wondered whether I saw these shadow people because I expected to, or because they were real. I am a reasonable man after all. When I grew up, I began to look into the lore of the shadow people, researching and reading about encounters going back decades, looking for things connected and familiar. Each person who encountered such entities would relate a sense of deep hatred and malevolent intent, often accompanied by physical sensations of sleep paralysis and even suffocation. Considering how violent these encounters could be, I felt somewhat fortunate for the relatively benign shadow entities my family was accustomed to. Unfortunately, though, there came a time where I was no longer safe from the more nefarious breed of shadows. About 10 years ago, I began seeing an entity I call the Freezing Man. He seems to appear at times in my life when I feel particularly comfortable, content, safe and secure, and always while I'm trying to sleep. It's as if he wants to remind me that no matter what, he will always be able to come and go as he pleases, interfering with my life, even inside my own home. Every so often, I wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of my bedroom door opening. I typically don't worry about hearing that sound because I don't live alone, and people do occasionally come into my room at night for various reasons. However, there are moments I get the strong feeling that an intruder has entered my space. Sometimes, the person or thing that opens the door is neither family nor friend. When it happens, I shoot up out of bed to defend myself from what I know is a negative presence, but within seconds I get stuck and frozen in place, unable to move a single muscle. It can happen before I've even fully opened my eyes, my body still comfortably situated for what should have been a good night's sleep. Even more terrifying is when I react quickly, springing into action, halfway off my bed, one foot on the ground, sheets still draped over my legs, and I'm just halted in mid-stride. An intense, painful tingling feeling spreads instantly over every inch of my body, and my breathing stops. My lungs unnaturally seized into a crippling mass of stone. I can't even move my eyes. Most of the time, I happen to be facing a wall or a dresser, and I'm forced to wait in confusion as my vision fades away from lack of oxygen and I lose consciousness. For years, I simply had no idea what was happening to me in those moments. I would try to get up, be frozen immediately, usually before I could even leave the bed, and I would be made to endure the agonizing feelings of pain and helplessness. The absolute worst feeling was the first time when my eyes happened to be focused on the hallway leading to the door at the critical moment. I woke up suddenly, hearing the doorknob turn. I immediately went to throw the sheets off of myself and happened to look toward the hallway before my body was stopped in its tracks. As my gaze was fixed there, I struggled to concentrate on the image as light from outside my room bled in through the open doorway. To my horror, a pitch-black figure of a man walked calmly into my view. Although there was no visible texture to him, I could tell by his outline that he was holding his hand outstretched toward me. It was as if he was projecting this crippling condition onto me. Even in his utter darkness, I could see a sort of turbulence that seemed to engulf him, creating a jagged outline, as if he was pushing his way through from another plane, struggling to keep his foothold in my world. I don't know if it was the visual artifacts of my brain's lack of oxygen, but I could swear there were small white bolts of electricity arcing around him as he approached. He slowly came toward my bed as I felt the pressure building in my head. As the blackness encroached from the edges of my vision, thoughts raced through my mind as I made a series of terrifying realizations. This man, this thing, was the cause of all this. He has been in my room, hidden just out of my view every time I'd been through this ordeal. Given that neither I nor anyone who lived with me had ever been hurt by him, at least not that I could see, it seems obvious that the Freezing Man was doing this to send some sort of message. I haven't seen him in months, but he has succeeded in at least one thing. The fear sits in the back of my mind many a night, the anxiety of his mysterious will, looming over me like a dark cloud. What exactly he wanted to convey is still beyond me. If I ever get the chance to confront him with my functions intact, perhaps I'll find out. Greetings, friends. First of all, many thanks to my new friend Blackeyed Blonde for lending me her voice and her amazing talents for this video. I've been meaning to work with her for quite a while now, ever since she reached out to me a couple of months ago on Twitter. If you go check out her channel, she has a number of excellent performances there. I'm sure you'll enjoy. Also, to anyone who's purchased a mr.xdreams item from teespring.com, thank you guys so much for going out there and representing the dreamers in the real world. I can't wait to see the awesome pictures of you guys wearing the shirts, hoodies, or tank tops, or sipping your favorite drink out of one of my mugs. The store is open for another few days, so please check it out if you haven't already. Anyway, a few words about these stories. As you can probably tell from what I've said earlier, I'm well acquainted with the feeling of fighting off a session of sleep paralysis that's oncoming. Though you may not think of it as being as intense as a physical altercation or real extreme danger, I can attest that it's one of the most terrifying moments you could possibly imagine. Knowing that an unspeakable, cerebral horror is creeping up on you, and you have to fight as hard as you can to escape it before it takes you. I can tell you from a significant amount of personal experience, myself having been in the military and other high-risk career fields, the panic and feverish need to escape the grips of oncoming or ongoing sleep paralysis is basically just as stressful as facing your possible physical mortality. Your brain can perceive it as something even more real than anything that could happen while you're awake. If you think about it, since everything you experience is information interpreted by your brain, imagine a scenario where the real world had little to no say in the images that you see, the sounds you hear, the sensations you feel, smell, and taste. You become the prisoner of your own mind. And as many of you probably know, that can be the most unforgiving prison of all. In the interview I conducted with Danielle, she mentioned that her most recent experience happened, of all places, at school. And I've noticed that when one is extremely exhausted or sleep deprived, the mental barrier between wakefulness and sleep seems to become much thinner and much more easy to waver back and forth on. To most people, it just means that you can easily fall asleep, but to somebody who suffers from sleep paralysis on a regular basis, it's a whole different situation. Much more potentially terrifying and dangerous to your psyche. And believe it or not, that in-between state can actually be harnessed as a way to control your dream world. Given the proper training, it is kind of a gateway to lucid dreaming. That's something I'll be talking about a little bit more in a future video. About the story regarding my personal experience, as you can tell, I kind of wrote it from the perspective of myself as I went through it. That meaning, I did it in the way that it feels to me, which is, it feels like it's a real entity coming after me. It doesn't feel like a dream. I usually know at some point or another when I'm in a dream, but this situation is somewhat unique in that way, where when it's happening, I fully, truly believe that it's real, even after I wake up. The crazy thing about sleep paralysis is that whenever it happens, it is absolutely real to you, at least during the moment itself. I'm still haunted by memories of that entity, just as I am with the things that I've seen in life and at war. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the stories, my friends. If you did, make sure you give it a like, and let me know in the comments section below what your thoughts and theories are regarding sleep paralysis. If you know anybody who's interested in the subject, please do share the video with them as well. I hope this message has found you well, my friends. Until next time, I'm Mr. X, and may your nights be full of dreams. To all my ride or die followers, if you're hearing this, leave a comment that includes the word stress. I'm sure this one won't be too difficult. And again, if anybody purchased anything from teespring.com/mr.xdreams or mr.xdreams mugs, please send me a picture of you wearing it. Thanks again. Love you guys.